Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, could be articles, research, you name it, and we really pull out what matters just for you, getting straight to the point.
Exactly. No fluff, just the core insights.
And today, we are diving deep into, well, all the noise, the rumors, the buzz around FC Barcelona and their transfer plans.
Yeah, we've waded through a pile of recent reports, articles, trying to make sense of it all.
Our mission really is to unpack who they're reportedly after, understand the real challenges involved because it's complex, and figure out what this transfer window actually means for Barca and the players caught up in it.
Especially because, let's be honest, for Barca right now, it's not just about talent spotting. It's navigating a very tricky financial situation, a tightrope, as you said.
That really jumps out from the sources, doesn't it? How much those finances are driving everything.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just who do we want, it's who can we possibly afford. And interestingly, the reports suggest it often comes down to the player wanting it badly enough to kind of make it happen.
Okay, let's dig into that. So the reports suggest, after maybe sorting out the goalkeeper spot, JOAN GARCIA's name comes up. The big focus, the main push this summer is for the left wing.
That's the consistent theme. Left-wing reinforcement. And three names keep popping up.
Right. Luis Diaz from Liverpool.
Nico Williams, Athletic Bilbao.
And Marcus Rashford at Manchester United. Big names.
All established players at major clubs, yeah.
But here's the twist, the central point in these reports, because of those finances we mentioned. Barca's strategy seems to be banking heavily on the players themselves, wanting the move so badly that they actively help make the deal work.
The sources use this term, mouiller, basically meaning the players need to get involved, get their hands dirty, push things from their end to make the terms manageable for Barca.
Because Barca can't just go toe-to-toe on massive fees or paying everything up front like some other clubs might.
Precisely. So, ironically, the player who can maybe help smooth over those financial bumps, they become the priority. It might even trump who the club prefers purely from a sporting angle.
Fine.
Well, that's a delicate situation.
So let's look at each one through that lens. How hard is it for them to be mouillé, based on what the reports are saying? Luis Diaz first, Liverpool, he's 28.
Okay, Diaz. The big problem there, according to the sources, is Liverpool. They're reportedly just not interested in selling, not even really willing to talk about it.
So that mouillé thing is crucial for him then.
Absolutely essential. It's all on him, really, to try and change the situation at Liverpool. If, and it's a big if, they could somehow agree on a price. Barca would naturally want to pay in installments, staggered payments. That's standard for them.
But Liverpool might not want that.
Probably not, especially if they don't want to sell in the first place. It's also mentioned, interestingly, that Diaz himself has apparently said publicly he's discussing with several clubs, so maybe he is looking around.
Okay, so for Diaz, reluctant selling club, player needs to push hard. What about Nico Williams? Younger, 22, Athletic Bilbao. Different situation.
Very different, yeah, but maybe even tougher financially. Nico has a release clause. The reports break it down. It's $58 million plus some inflation adjustment, making it around $62 million total.
Okay, a set price. Sounds simpler.
But here's the catch. Athletic Bilbao, the reports are very clear on this. They would demand that entire $62 million immediately upfront.
Oof. And Barca's current cash flow, writing a check that big right now,
seems impossible based on everything we're reading. They just don't have that kind of liquid cash ready to go.
And are there other hurdles with Nico?
Yeah, competition. Reports mention clubs like Bayern Munich, Arsenal apparently offering him significantly higher wages than Barca can afford right now. So for Nico, the sources talk about a double gesture being needed. It's huge. First, he'd have to accept a much lower salary to fit Barca's structure. Second, he'd somehow need to convince Athletic, who are notoriously rigid about release clauses, and he apparently has a good relationship with them, to accept staggered payments instead of the full whack immediately.
Wow.
And the sources are pretty pessimistic about Athletic agreeing to that. Highly unlikely.
So reduce his own money and change his club's fundamental policy on payment. That's a massive ask. They mentioned his friendship with Lamine Yamal, I saw.
You do, yeah. It's a nice connection, a point of interest, but it doesn't really change the hard financial reality of that release clause payment.
Doesn't sound promising then, despite the talent. Yeah. Okay, third name. Marcus Rashford, 27, Manchester United.
Rashford's interesting because remember he was linked back in the January window?
Vaguely, yeah.
Reports back then suggested he was willing to lower his salary to make a move to Barca happen. So there's maybe some precedent for willingness there.
Okay, so what would need to happen now?
Well, the sources suggest he'd basically have to persuade Manchester United to let him go for a fee that Barca can actually manage. A reasonable fee, they say. That could be a direct transfer, or maybe, a loan deal with an option to buy later.
Which still requires him being pretty mouillé, right?
Yeah.
Convincing a club like United to sell an asset for potentially less than they'd ideally want, or on terms favorable to the buyer.
Exactly right. It's still a big ask. So you look at the three. From a purely sporting view, the reports kind of suggest Diaz and Nico might be slightly ahead of Rashford, maybe Diaz first, but the actual priority list, it gets shuffled completely by the money, by the feasibility. It becomes about which player can actually do the most to make the deal possible on Barca's terms, who can be the most mouillé. Their ability to facilitate the move almost becomes more important than their ranking on the sporting director's wish list.
That's fascinating. The financial reality just totally dictates the approach. Okay, so while they're struggling to bring players in, there are also whispers about players leaving. And one name really stood out from the sources, Marc-Andre ter Stegen.
Yeah, quite a surprising rumor, this one. It seems to have originated, or at least gained traction, from Fanatic, which is a big Turkish sports media outlet.
Okay.
They have 1.2 million followers on Twitter, so when they report something, it travels fast. And they're reporting a personal agreement between ter Stegen and Galatasaray.
Hold on, personal agreement. But he's got a contract with Barcelona until, what, 2028?
Exactly. Long-term deal. So even if he has agreed terms with Galatasaray personally, which is still just a report, they'd still need to negotiate a transfer with Barca. He can't just walk away.
So what are Galatasaray reportedly thinking then?
This is the bit that sounds, pretty optimistic from their side. The Turkish reports suggest Galatasaray are hoping to sign him on a free transfer.
For free. Ter Stegen, with 3 years left on his deal?
Yeah.
That seems unlikely for Barcelona to agree to.
The sources we looked at seem to agree with you. One report flat out called the idea absurd. Why would Barca let a top keeper on a significant contract leave for nothing? They'd expect a substantial fee, an exorbitant price, as one source put it.
Makes sense. So, okay, why would ter Stegen, who always seems so committed to Barca, even be in talks if those reports are true?
Good question. The reports speculate it's down to a few things. Maybe a feeling of general instability at Barca recently, a difficult period for him personally, perhaps. But the key driver seems to be the 2026 World Cup.
Ah, the German national team place.
Exactly. He needs regular Champions League football to cement his spot, especially after getting some recent starts under Nagelsmann. He wants to build on that.
And Galatasaray, they're in the Champions League proper.
Straight into the group stage, yes, so they can offer that platform immediately. Plus, the reports stress Galatasaray aren't messing about. They've shown ambition. They point to the signing of Leroy Sané.
Another German international, big wages.
Right, proof they can afford top salaries and attract big names. They also definitely need a top keeper. Their long-serving guy, Muslera, just left after 14 years. And the reports mention they have a competitive squad, potentially keeping stars like Osimhen too, though that might be ambitious.
So it's actually a credible sporting destination for him, potentially, if the Champions League and World Cup spot are his priorities.
It seems plausible, yeah.
And as you said right at the start, this connects back to Barca's own goalkeeper plans. If ter Stegen were to leave, that obviously makes someone like JOAN GARCIA even more relevant.
Absolutely. Shows how interconnected everything is. One move potentially triggering another, especially when finances are so tight.
So wrapping this all up, if you're listening and trying to make sense of all the transfer noise around Barca, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into the sources?
I think it's that fundamental clash, that tension between Barcelona's ambitions, wanting top players, and the harsh reality of their financial limits.
Yeah, and those limits aren't just a footnote. They're actively shaping every decision. They're forcing Barca to pivot from just identifying the best player to identifying the player who is, achievable.
Which often means relying on the player themselves to bridge the gap, to take a pay cut or push their current club to be mouillé.
It really shines a light on how much power, or maybe lack of power sometimes, players have in these deals. They might want to move, but making it happen often requires significant personal sacrifice or effort. And we saw that domino effect too. A potential big exit like ter Stegen doesn't just leave a gap, it potentially frees up funds or changes the calculus for bringing someone else in, like a younger keeper like Garcia.
Yeah, understanding all these layers, the money constraints, the player power strategy, the knock-on effects gives you a much clearer view than just reading headlines linking names. You see the actual game being played behind the scenes.
Definitely. So we've looked at the tough chase for guys like Diaz, Nico, Rashford on the wing, and this a pretty surprising situation bubbling up around Ter Stegen. The sources are clear. For Barcelona right now, transfers are as much about financial engineering and hoping players cooperate as they are about sporting desire, maybe even more so.
The reports certainly paint a picture of a club having to be very, very creative. And maybe a bit fortunate.
So here's something to think about as the transfer window really gets going. Given Barcelona's financial situation, is this strategy relying so much on players to make deals happen for them? Is that a sustainable way forward? Or is it just a massive gamble that might not pay off?
That's the million-dollar or maybe multi-million euro question, isn't it?
It is indeed something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Hope it helped cut through some of the noise.